Hello and welcome back to Get Great at Maths. I'm here to help you pass your maths exam, so hit that like and subscribe button. We're going to look at keywords, key formulas and how to gain top marks. So let's get ready to get great at maths. The first question is a question on standard form. And standard form is when we write either very large numbers or very small numbers using the power times 10 to the power of something. So it's a different way of writing numbers. Now question A is written as an ordinary number, and part B, the number is written in standard form. So part A, we've got to convert the ordinary number into standard form, and part B, we've got to write it as an ordinary number. Now to do this, we're looking at the decimal point position. Now in any number, the decimal point is either given, or if you can't see a decimal point, it is after the last digit. So in the question 1A, the decimal point is after the last zero, which I've just indicated here. So this decimal point now needs to move after the first non-zero digit. So to write any number in standard form, there is always one non-zero digit at the beginning of the number. So if you see in part B there, here before, there is one non-zero digit before that decimal point appears. So the decimal point is going to go between the 6 and the 0, and we've got to work out how many times the decimal point moves to the left to go between the 6 and the 0. So we're going to count. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the new decimal point is going to come between the 6 and the 0, and we write that as 6.05 times 10 to the power of 6, because we counted 6 times to move the decimal point. Now the reason this works is because 10 to the power of 6 is 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, which is 1 million. Now 6.05 times a million is 6,050,000, which is what the question starts with. If you look over on the right hand side of the mark scheme, it tells us that you can accept 6.05 times 10 to the 06, or 6.5 with a dot, which means times 10 to the 6, but they will not accept if the times 10 is written up high as a power or the times 10 is missing. So be careful to make sure you write your answer nice and clearly to get the mark for this question, because this is out of 1 mark. This number here in the square brackets at the end tells me how many marks for the question. Now in part B, we've got to write 4.58 times 10 to the negative 3 as an ordinary number. Now if I've got a positive power, like in part A, I get a large number, but if I've got a negative power, I end up with a small number. So the decimal point this time is going to move from the position between the 4 and the 5, and it's going to go towards the left. Okay, so it's going to go left 3 places. Now to work out what the new number is, the first thing to do is to write out the digits 4, 5, 8 without a decimal point in there, and put some zeros at the front because we know it's going to be a small digit. Now the decimal point starts off between the 4 and the 5, so you can see I've just marked that on the diagram. I'm now going to move this decimal point 3 places to the left, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Here's the new decimal point, so I can write the new decimal point in here. It's a bit big. And I get 0.00458. So you can see the decimal point has come in but after with 2 zeros before that 4. Now in the question, or in the answer here, it's got a square bracket around the 0. That just means that it is optional. You didn't have to put that 0 in. So if you put 0.00458, you are correct. If you put extra zeros in, this word condone means allow any extra zeros that were added. Like in my question here, I've got 3 extra zeros at the beginning. That's absolutely fine. This question is worth 1 mark, so you can see here at the end it tells me it's worth 1 mark. For mark scheme, you can see the 1 mark is awarded here, or in part A, the marks are awarded here. So in total for this question, it is out of 2 marks. Question 2 is a BIDMAS question, where BIDMAS stands for B and BIDMAS stands for brackets. The I stands for indices, which are the powers, or like in this case, the squared. D stands for divide. M stands for multiply. A stands for add. And the S stands for subtract. And we need to use BIDMAS in order to be able to use our calculator to answer this question. Now your calculator is really clever and they will be able to just cope with you typing in the question as you see it into the calculator and press equals, and you will get the answer. But this question is worth 2 marks. So you can see here in the right hand side we've got 2 marks for this question. So it is important to show you working out in case you make a mistake as you go along. So I'm going to show you the full method in order to be able to get the full marks for this question. And you can type it in, as I said, if you struggle with finding it, doing it separately. Now we're going to look at the fraction button. Now on your calculator, every calculator is slightly different, but you're looking for a calculator button where it's got 2 squares above each other with a line in between, like you can see that's just appeared. This is your fraction button. Now if you press your fraction button first and then you press 270 over the 2.5 squared, to get the squared you need to find this button with a little square with a little 2 next to it, which gives you the indice or the power. So in BIDMAS the indice must come first. So we need to work out that first section. Now I can show you that we've got 270 divided by 6.25. Now the 6.25 comes from this 2.5 squared. So using the squared button on your calculator, I've just shown you here on the right hand side, gives me that 6.25. Now the next bit we've got divide, multiply, add and subtract. Now we have got add and subtract, which is right at the end, and we've got to do divide before we come to the add and subtract. But because this divide is like there are magic brackets around the numerator and around the denominator, okay, we actually have to do the add and the subtract first before we can do the divide. So if we add together 4.6 plus 17.2, that gives me the 21.8 in the numerator on the right hand side. And if I add or subtract 8.4, take away 6.8 in the denominator, gives me 1.6, which is the bottom in the right hand side on the denominator. Now I've just got to type this into my calculator and subtract the 2 numbers. If you do that, that will give you 43.2, take away 13.625. Now to get the answer, all you've got to do is type those 2 digits into your calculator and press equals. Note on the new calculator the equals button is exe, meaning execute. And then to convert that to a decimal, you'll need to press the format button and then press the arrows to get to convert it to a decimal, or the SD button depending on which calculator you're using. If you type that in your calculator, you will end up with 29.575 for 2 marks. So here you can see in the mark scheme this is worth 2 marks. There is a method mark for getting 43.2, which is this first number we got here on the first part, or 216 over 5. These 2 numbers here are exactly the same. One is just in fraction form, one is in decimal form. And similarly over here I have got 13.625 or 109 over 8. These 2 numbers are exactly the same, which is the second digit I've got over here. Now it's got an OE next to it, which means or equivalent. So you could write an equivalent answer. Similarly for the final answer, you could have written, instead of 29.575, you could have written the 2 answers which have been given over on the right hand side as a top heavy fraction or a mixed fraction to get the final 2 marks as well. Any of these answers are acceptable. Now question 3 is to do with compound interest and reverse percentages. So in this question, it's quite a wordy question, and it's really important that you read the question carefully, highlight key bits in the question as you're going along, and make sure you understand what you are being asked to do. So you're given some key information. So you're told in January 2018 an art collector bought a painting. In 2020, note the years of the months are exactly the same, which helps because we don't have to do any extra calculations there. So it's literally just the difference between the years in a bit. So in 2020, he sold it for £17,640. Now we're assuming the value of painting increases by 5% every year. Now we've got to calculate the profit. Okay, so the question wants us to find the profit, and it says you must show your working out. Now if you don't show your working out, you will not get the full 5 marks for this question. So down here it tells me that the question is worth 5 marks. So there's a lot of information to do in this question. Now, first of all, we need to know the formula for compound interest. Okay, so the compound interest formula is the new amount equals the original amount times the multiplier to the number of years. Now, to calculate my multiplier, this is linked to the increased by 5%. Now, what that means is I take 100 because the percentage is out of 100. I add on 5 because that is the percentage increased. So the increase means I add 5 because it's plus 5. And then I'm going to divide by 100 to make it a decimal. And that will give you 1 mark on the exam for finding your multiplier. I've then got to work out the number of years. So it's between 2020 and 2018. So if I subtract those two numbers, that gives me 2. I can then put these values into the formula. So the new amount is this 17,640. It's going to be the original amount times my multiplier, which we've just worked out to be 1.05, to the power of 2 because it is 2 years. Now I've got to work out the original amount. So to find the original amount, I need to get rid of this times 1.05 squared. So I've got to do the opposite. Now the opposite to multiply is divide, so I'm going to divide both sides by 1.05 squared. That will give you a mark if you take that original, find the new amount divided by your multiplier squared. That will give you your second mark. Now I can then get an answer of 16,000 if you just type that into your calculator. There's your third mark. Now we've got to work out the profit. Now the profit is the new amount, which is the 17,640, taken away the original amount, which is the 16,000 that we've just calculated. So I've just got to subtract those two numbers from each other for a mark. And then the final mark comes from my answer of £1,640 for the final 5th mark. So you can see clearly where the marks are awarded within this question. Remember to make sure you write your answer on the dotted line where the pound sign is. The mark scheme shows us that the answer is 1,640 with the correct working, and the total number of marks here is 5 marks. Now down the bottom it says SC3 for answer 1,640 with no working or insufficient working insufficient working, which basically means you can only get a maximum of 3 marks for this question if you just wrote down the answer. You cannot get the full 5 marks for the answer even if you got it correct, because in the question it says you must show your working. So if it says you must show your working, you must do what it says. In the mark scheme you've got a B1, which is a method mark, so for my multiplier of 1.05, 2 marks for doing the new amount divided by the multiplier squared. The OE on the end means or equivalent. M1 is another method mark for using my compound interest formula. So if I did that one instead of doing the M2 mark. And then there is a method mark for subtracting your new amount, take away there. Now the word there means if you made a mistake working out the original amount, then you can still get a method mark because you use your number rather than the 16,000 that it should be. So it just means you can still get a method mark for doing the subtraction, which brings you to the total of 5 marks. Now question 4 is a question to do with angles in polygons. Now it's quite a wordy question, so make sure you read the question carefully and look at key information given in the question. So for example, the key word here, regular, at the beginning of the question is highlighted in bold, so you need to spot that you have got a regular polygon. So here there are 3 regular polygons in the diagram, and you're told that 2 of the polygons are pentagons. Now if you look at the diagram, the angle in between where I'm just highlighting at the minute and this next angle where I'm highlighting are exactly the same. So they are my 2 polygons which are the same, which are the 2 pentagons. Now you should be aware that the word pentagon is a 5-sided shape. Okay, so here's my pentagon looking like this, and we've got 2 of those pentagons joined at a point. And we've got to work out the number of sides in the 3rd polygon. So we're trying to find the number of sides in this 3rd polygon. Now this question is worth 6 marks. In the bottom right hand corner it tells us how many marks the question is worth. The question also says you must show your working out. And if you do not show your working, you will not be able to be awarded the full marks for this question. Now, to be able to answer this question, we need to know some key formula. So I recommend, if you're doing key notes on a separate piece of paper, write the key notes at the top, and then you can write down your key formulas so you've got them all in one place. So as you go through these videos and watch more of them, you can add key formulas as we go along until you get a whole revision list of key formulas from all the videos. So the first key formula we're looking at today's video is the sum of angles at a point add up to 360 degrees. So the diagram you can see at the top, which was given in the question, all those three angles there must add up to 360 degrees. The sum of the interior angles is n minus 2 times by 180, where n is the number of sides of the shape. So in this shape here, I've got an interior angle. You can see I'm highlighting. I'm going to just change colour to a darker colour. So you can see here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 interior angles on this pentagon. So my formula will be the number of sides, which is 5, take away 2 times by 180. The next key formula we're going to need is the interior angle plus the exterior angle add up to 180. Now we've looked at the 5 interior angles and their sum in the last formula, but now I'm just focusing on one of the interior angles. So that is just one of these angles. Now the exterior angle is very tricky because a lot of people think the exterior angle is the angle all the way around the outside, the remaining angle to what you've got, but it's not. We have to draw an extension line on from that polygon, which you can just see has just been drawn there. And the exterior angle is the angle which adds together to make 180 degrees. So you can see in the diagram my interior angle and my exterior angle together add to make 180 degrees. The next key formula is the exterior angle could be found by doing 360 divided by n, where n is the number of sides of the polygon. And we're going to need to use all 4 of these formulas to help us answer this question. I'm going to show you 2 methods, and it's personal preference as to which method you choose to use. So method 1, we're going to use the formula for the exterior angle of a pentagon, which is 360 divided by the number of sides of the pentagon, which will be 5 in this case. And if I do that, that gives me an exterior angle of a pentagon of 72. So where the green arrow is pointing, that angle there will be 72. That will give you 1 mark in the exam. Now my interior angle is going to be 180 minus the exterior angle. So this third angle down here, or this third formula, I'm just going to highlight it for you with a little green arrow, just putting down here. So my interior angle plus the exterior angle is 180 formula. The third one down on the left hand side can be rearranged to give me an interior angle is 180 minus the exterior angle. Now I know the exterior angle is 72 degrees, so if I do 180 take away 72 degrees, that gives me an interior angle of 108. Now that interior angle, okay, is the purple arrow, and on my diagram that is the angle here where I just highlighted earlier, where the pentagon is going to be, and the angle next to it. So I've got 2 angles which are 108, the interior angles of those pentagons. Now the angle we need to find is the angle at the top, which is the angle on the third polygon. And if we could work out the interior angle of that third polygon, then I could work out the exterior angle, and then if I've got the exterior angle, I can then work out the number of sides of the shape. So we know the angle of the sum of the angles at a point add up to 360. So the angle x plus the 208s, so 108 plus 108 are going to add together to give me 360. So x plus 108 plus 108 equals 360. I can add those 108s together to give me 216. And the opposite to plus 216 is going to be subtract 216. So if I do x take away, or 360 take away 216 gives me 144 degrees, which is the interior angle of the unknown polygon, and that is your third mark there. Now once I've got the interior angle of the unknown polygon, I've now got to work out the exterior of the angle of the unknown polygon. So that's going to be 180 take away the interior angle. Again, that third formula on the left hand side rearranged to find the exterior angle. So So my exterior angle of the unknown polygon is going to be 180 take away 144, which is 36 degrees, which is worth 1 mark. So that's my 4th mark on this question. Now the 4th formula on the left hand side tells me the exterior angle is 360 divided by n. But I can rearrange this to find the number of sides is 360 divided by the exterior angle, just by cross multiplying the exterior angle and the number of sides. Just swap them over. Now I know the exterior angle is 36, so the number of sides of an unknown polygon is going to be 360 divided by 36 for 1 mark. You work that out, gives you an angle of 10, which is the final 6th mark. So that is how I get the 6 marks for this question. That is method 1. Now method 2 is very similar, but it's just a different method in order to get the interior angle for the pentagon in the first place. From this point here, where I'm just putting a line across, it's going to be exactly the same method down. It's just a different way to get that interior angle in the first place. So method 2, we're using the sum of the interior angles of a pentagon is 5 take away 2 times 180. So that is the difference on this question here, to find the sum of the interior angles. And that is going to be 540. So if you type in 5 take away 2 times 180 on your calculator up here at the top, that gives me 540, which is the sum of the interior angles of the pentagon. So all of the 5 angles added together of this pentagon, so I can mark them off again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the 5 angles in this pentagon all added together add up to give me 540. So to work out the one interior angle where the purple arrow is pointed to, if I do 540 divided by 5, that gives me 108, which is the 2nd mark. So there are 2 different ways to get the 1st mark and the 2nd mark compared to the method 1. The rest of the method, from where I'm just drawing the green line again, downwards is exactly the same as what we did earlier. So you just work out the interior angle of the unknown polygon, then find the exterior angle of the unknown polygon, which was 36, then put it into the formula for the number of sides, which is 360 divided by the exterior angle, which again will give me the total of the 6 marks and an as side of 10 for my final answer. Now the mark scheme tells us the answer is 10 and there are 6 marks in this question. Now down the bottom in the middle I've got SC3 for the answer of 10 with no working or insufficient working. So basically if you wrote down the answer 10, the maximum number of marks you can get are 3 marks. You have to show your working. Now M2 means 2 method marks for getting 180 minus the 360 divided by 5. So there's 1 method mark for doing the 360 divided by 5. Taking that from 180 gives you the first mark, gives you the 2nd mark. There's a method mark for doing 360 divided by 5, or doing the formula for the sum of the interior angles, 5 take away 2 times 180. You also, this word and means you also need to be able to do this. So the method mark here is 360 take away 2 times their 108, sorry. Now I did 360 take away 108 take away 108. That gave us the 144. So this answer here was the 144. It says implied over here on the right hand side by 144. So if you'd written somewhere in your working 144, you've got 3 method marks for getting 144. Now there's 2 method marks for doing your 360. So that's the sum of the interior angle divided by the 180 take away their 144. Now their 144 means your answer for that 144. So your angle that you worked out up here of 144, whatever answer you got there, if you use that in this calculation here, you will get 2 method marks. Same here below, there's a method mark for doing 180. Take away your answer you got earlier for that 144. So that's where the method marks are awarded in this question. On the mark scheme, you've got the letters OE, that means or equivalent. So if you've got different answers which mean exactly the same, then they are absolutely fine. But you can see where we get the 6 marks from on the question. And I showed you on my working as well where those 6 marks came from. Again, if you'd written just the number 108, okay, you would get 2 marks for that. Or if you'd written the number 72 or 540, you would get 1 mark for that. So there's lots of information on this mark scheme. The main bits you need to be aware of is the final answer over here on the left is 10, and that is worth 6 marks. But you must show you're working, otherwise you can only get a maximum of 3 marks. So question 5 is a question to do with scatter graphs. And in scatter graphs, you've got a lot of key information, and you can see there are lots of little crosses on the diagram that you can see, where the height is going along in the x-axis and the temperature is going up in the y-axis. And on question 1, all you've got to do is plot the information on the scatter graph. So it says plot these on your scatter diagram. So the scatter diagram is the diagram above, and the question is worth 2 marks. You have got to plot 2 points, so you'll get a mark for plotting each point correctly. So the first point you're going to plot is a height of 500 and then a temperature of 8.8. So you need to look across in your x-axis to the height of 500. Then you're going to go up to a temperature of 8.8. Now looking at your scale here, you've got between 8 and 9, you've got 5 little squares, which means 8.8 is going to be 4 little squares up. So you need to make sure you come up 4 little squares here for 8.8. And if you plot that accurately, you will get 1 mark. The second mark comes from plotting the second point, which is at 1580 and a height of 1.2, or the temperature is 1.2. So 1580 is going to be between 1500 and the 1600. Again, we've got 5 little squares between here, so this time it's going up in 20s, so we're 1 square away from the 1600 is where we're going to be plotting across. And then we've got to go to a height of 1.2, so here's our 1 here, and then we're going to go up 1 little square higher than that to give me the new point. And again, if you can plot both those points accurately, you'll get the full 2 marks. The mark scheme says clearly 2 points are accurately plotted, and B1 is a method mark for each point plotted, and there are 2 marks on the mark scheme for plotting these points. There is a tolerance of plus or minus half a small square, so if you are slightly out, you are allowed to still get the marks, so just make sure you are very accurate where you're plotting. Now part B says describe the type of correlation shown in the scatter graph. Now there are 3 different types of correlation. You've got a positive correlation, you've got a negative correlation, and you've got no correlation. Now positive correlation is when the graph, you've got your 2 axes, your x and your y axis, and the points go up in, just got a little cross going here, that's it. So going up in this kind of direction. And later on they'll ask you to draw a line of best fit, and if the points are going in this kind of direction, you've got a positive. Now our points are going totally the opposite direction to this, so this is a negative correlation. If the points were scattered all over the place, then there would be no correlation. So this was just worth 1 mark for stating the word negative. If you did write negative correlation, that is absolutely fine. It just says you can ignore anything extra that's added. The key word they're looking for is the word negative. Now part C is we've got to draw on a line of best fit, and we've got to estimate the temperature at 1000 meters. Now the line of best fit is a straight line that goes through the majority of points, and you've got an equal number of points below the line and above the line. So I've just drawn a line on here, going through as many points as I can, and there are 5 points below the line and there are 5 points above the line. So this is a good line of best fit. Now I'm going to look for a height of 1000 meters. So here, if I come across to my axis till I get 1000, if I come up until I hit my line of best fit and then draw a line across, this will estimate the temperature. Now I'm between 5 and 6, so I've got a temperature of 5.5. So you would get 2 marks in this question, 1 mark for drawing the line of best fit, 1 mark for getting 5.5. They're both your marks. Now the exam paper mark scheme says that you've got method marks, so a B1 mark for drawing your line of best fit, And then there's the second mark for getting any number between 5 and 6.5. So depending on where your line of best fit is drawn, any value between 5 and 6.5 will give you the second mark on part C. On part D, we've got to draw a circle around the outlier on the scatter graph. So the key word here is an outlier. Now the outlier is a point that doesn't fit with the rest of the data. It's out on its own, nowhere near the rest of the data. And the point you're looking for is the point I've just circled here at the top. So if you've indicated the point 1209.2, you have got 1 mark, and that's shown on the mark scheme. In part E, we've got to explain why using the scatter graph to estimate the temperature at 1,800 meters may be unreliable. So 1,800 meters is down here on the right hand side. You can see that is before, or that is after my line of best fit. So the line of best fit is not near this point 1,800. So we don't really know what's going on at this stage here. So the graph could be unreliable because we don't actually know what is going on. Now the mark scheme gives several reasons. So they accept any correct explanation, which is worth 1 mark, which is not particularly helpful when you're coming to mark the exam paper. But it does say see the appendix. And in the appendix, right at the end of the mark scheme, you get all this information here. So if you give any of the reasons at the top, which I'm just highlighting here, so any of these reasons up here, you will get 1 mark. Any of the reasons underneath, you get 0 marks for any of these reasons down below. So none of the ones below the line that I'm just about to draw in, none of these are valid, but everything above the line is valid. On the reasons for not, you've got LOBF, that means line of best fit. So the line of best fit does not reach there, that is not good enough for a mark. The answer is not on the scale, again, not good enough for a mark. The pattern may change when the temperature goes below 0, again, not good enough for a mark. So what they're looking for is too far away from the last piece of data, or the recordings haven't been taken since 1,580 meters. So they're looking for you to put in numerical values to state where the last data was put in. It would need another recording after 1,800 to average. The last temperature recorded near 1,800 is 1,580. So any of the reasons here above the line are acceptable. So I'll let you have a read through any of those to see which one you chose to use. Part F, you've got to work out the percentage of the 15 temperatures which are below 6 degrees Celsius. Now this is a 3 mark question, so this is the hardest question we've got here. So it's worth 3 marks, and the key is this 6 degrees Celsius. So I've just drawn a line across at the 6. Then we've got to look at below. So this is below the line. So I'm going to look at how many points are below the line. So I can count them. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points which are below the line. And from these 6 points which are below the line, I've then got to find the percentage. Now to work a percentage out, I've got to find my fraction and then times that fraction by 100 to make a percentage. Now I've got 6 that are below out of my total of 15, then I'm just going to times it by 100 to make it a percentage, which will give me 40%. So 40% of them are below. On the mark scheme, you can see that you've got B1, which is a method mark for getting 6. There is a method mark for doing your 6 divided by the 15 times by 100, and your third mark comes for getting that 40. So here where the 3 marks are awarded for. Now question 6 is a question to do with proportion. This is quite a wordy question, so make sure you read the question carefully and highlight keywords from within the question. If you're told in the question a machine can dig on average 2 centimeters of tunnel each minute, and it operates for 24 hours every day. Now in part A, we've got to work out how many days it will take to dig the tunnel of length 3.5 kilometers. We want to know how many days, and we've got to give our answer to the nearest day. So we've got to be careful when we look at this question because the units are different. So I've got 2 centimetres and I've got 3.5 kilometres. So make sure we're going to convert our units into the same thing. So to start with, I'm going to look at the first bit of information that was given for every minute. So each minute we went 2 centimetres. So in 1 hour, I'm going to go 120 centimetres because I'm going to do 2 times 60 because there's 60 minutes in an hour, which gives me 120. So in 1 day, that will give me 24 hours, which is going to be 120, the answer I've just worked out for 1 hour, times it by 24, which gives me 2,880 centimetres, which is the length dug in 1 day, and that will give you your first method mark. Now this question tells us in the bottom right hand corner of the question that it is marked out of 4. So we're going to get a total of 4 marks for this question. Now the next bit, we're going to need to convert this 3.5 kilometres into centimetres, so we're in the same units. So 3.5 kilometres is the same as 3,500 metres, just by multiplying by 1,000, because we all know that 1 kilometre is equal to 1,000 metres. I then need to convert that to centimetres by multiplying by 100, because there are 100 centimetres in 1 metre, which gives me 350,000 centimetres, which is the length of the tunnel, which is your second mark. Now I want to work out how many days it's going to take to dig this tunnel. So the number of days to dig the tunnel is going to be the total tunnel length divided by the length dug in 1 day, which is going to give me 350,000 divided by 2,880, which is my third method mark. Then if you type that in your calculator, because this is a calculator paper, will give you 121.5 days. Now we need to give the answer to the nearest day. So remember in the question it says to the nearest day. So we need to round that to give me 122 days for 1 mark, which is your final answer for the 4th mark. You can see on the mark scheme, it is 122, 4 marks in total for this question. B3 means there are 3 marks if you got 121.5, or there are 3 marks for doing the calculation that you can see here, or equivalent, so OE means or equivalent. You get a method mark for looking at converting your time, so doing your 2 times your 60 by 24. And you can also get a method mark for converting your distance in kilometres into centimetres. There's another method mark there. And you can also get another method mark for doing the distance divided by the rate, which is this sum down the bottom that you can see, up to a maximum of 2 marks for there. The total for this mark was for this question was 4 marks. Now in part B, the machine actually digs an average of 2.5 centimetres. Now in part A we were digging at 2 centimetres, so this is more, so it's going to be digging more than what you've done previously for most of the time, and an average of 1.5 each minute for the rest of the time, so that is less. So overall we're going to be digging more. So if you're digging more, okay, you've got to think about what that effect is going to have to your answer. The 1.5 which for the rest of the time, which is slightly less, we can ignore that time and deal with this 2.5, which is more, because it is for most of the time. So overall it's going to take less time, okay, than the 122 days. Okay, any correct explanation, it says see the appendix, so I'm just going to show you what the appendix says. Okay, there are 2 methods that they give in the appendix for giving you more. So it will take less time for their 122 days, or my answer to part A will decrease. Either of those answers are acceptable. The ones down the bottom will not give you a mark. So anything down the bottom here will not give you a mark. So if you just said it will increase, or it will change the time, or it will not affect my answer, any of those won't give you the second, or won't give you the mark. This was worth 1 mark in the exam. Okay, so any of those reasons above at the top will give you a mark, but make sure you write down your answer nice and clearly, and your answer can be read easily. The question 7 is a volume problem, and we're looking at 2 shapes here, a pyramid and a sphere. The pyramid, we're told down the bottom the formula for the volume of the pyramid. So down the bottom it tells us the formula is 1/3 the area of the base times the perpendicular height. And it tells us the volume of the sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. Now this question is worth 5 marks in total. And the question wants us to work out the radius of the sphere. Now the question also says you must show your working out, and if you don't show your working out you won't get the full 5 marks even if you get the correct answer. Now in the diagram, the key information from within the question has been given in the diagram. So you're told that the pyramid has a base of 12.3, which you can see clearly in the diagram by these two 12.3, which means that we've got a square base pyramid here. And we've got a perpendicular height, so that's the maximum height going up from the middle of 15.7, which is on my diagram as well. We're also told that the volume of the pyramid and the sphere have got exactly the same volume, so we're going to need to use that information as well. Now the volume of the pyramid is the one we've got most information for to start with, so we will start there. Now we're told the volume of the pyramid down the bottom is 1/3 the area of the base times the perpendicular height. Specifically for this square base pyramid, the volume is going to be 1/3 times the length squared times the height, because the length is the same in both cases because it is a square. Now the length is the 12.3 squared, so I've got 1/3 times 12.3 squared times the perpendicular height of 15.7. This is a calculator paper, so just type that into your calculator, and that will give you 791.751. Now that first bit up there will give you 1 mark for doing the working, and your second mark is for getting the volume of 791.751. That will be in centimetres cubed. Now you're told that the volume of the pyramid and the volume of the sphere are exactly the same. So the pyramid and the sphere have got the same volume. And we know down the bottom that the volume of the sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. This answer we've just worked out is equal to 4/3 pi r cubed for 1 mark. So we've got 3 marks so far. So just from using the information in the question and taking key bits of information, we've got 3 marks. From here, this is the tricky bit. We've got to rearrange to find r, the radius of the sphere. So I'm going to get rid of the divided by 3. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 3 first. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 4 pi to get rid of this multiply by 4 pi. So I'm going to just get rid of this section here. Get rid of that times by 4 pi. I'm going to divide both sides by 4 pi. Now to get r on its own, I need to take the cube root. So I'm going to do the cube root of that answer to give me the value of r. You would get 1 mark for saying that r cubed is equal to 189.016628, or rounded to 189.02. And then to get the final mark, we need to cube root that answer to give me r is 5.7389. Remember, in the cube root button on your calculator, it looks like the square root with the little 3 at the front. Gives me the cube root. Okay, so that's the button you're looking for on the calculator. Type in the cube root of 189 with all the other digits, gives you r is 5.73896. Now you need to give your answer to 3 significant figures. So when we're rounded to 3 significant figures, I've got a 5, 7 and 3 are my first 3 significant figures. I draw a line after the 3 and look at the digit afterwards, which is the 8. The 8 is going to tell me I'm going to round up because 8 is bigger than 5. I'm going to round up here, which means I'm going to round up my 3 to make it a 4. So to 3 significant figures, r is equal to 5.74. Okay, there's my answer. You can see here the 5 marks down the side where the marks are awarded from on the mark scheme. Mark scheme is here. You can see on the mark scheme we have got down the bottom with correct working. So we've got 5.73 or 5.74 or 5.7, but you have to have the correct mark working to get them 5 marks here. It says down here SC3 for answer of the 5.73 or the 5.74 or the 5.7 with no working or insufficient working. So if you don't show your working, the maximum number of marks you can get for this question is 3 marks. For 4 marks, if you had written down the volume was 1/3 times 12.3 squared times 15.7 divided by 4 pi over 3. OE is all equivalent. Or if you came down to your R cubed value of the 791.8 divided by the 4/3 of pi. Also 3 marks were awarded, could have been awarded for working out 4/3 of pi r cubed was equivalent to the volume of the pyramid, or equivalent as we've shown earlier. There is 1 method mark just for working out the volume of the pyramid, and there is an answer mark for getting the 791 or rounded equivalent for the volume of that pyramid. It is a fairly straightforward question when you break it down, but it does take a lot of information to break down this question to be able to get the full marks for this question. Now question 8 is a question to do with quadratic graphs. And on this question we're told that the table of values for y equals x squared plus 2x minus 2 is given below. Now it's very unusual that all the values are filled in on the table. Normally part A is fill in some of the missing gaps. But here all you've got to do is plot the values. Or in this case it says draw the graph, which basically means plot the values, and you get 3 marks for doing this. So it's quite an easy 3 marks to start with. So the first coordinate you're going to be plotting is the coordinate -4, 6. So that means you go along the corridor and up the stairs. So you go along 4 in the x-axis, remember that's the horizontal one, so along, and then you go up in the y afterwards. So I go 4 along in the x-axis, 6 up in the y-axis, which takes me to my first point here. The second point I'm going to plot is the point -3, 1. So again I go 3 to the left from the origin, or the point 0, 0, and then 1 up. Next point is the point -2, 2, and we plot each one in turn. And then I've got the point -1, -3, and then I've got the point 0, -2, and then the point 1, 1, and then the point 2, 6. Okay, so I've plotted all the points. Now to draw the graph, I have to draw a curve between all these points, so it's a nice smooth curve to complete the graph. Now this was worth 3 marks. So in the exam, you get a mark for doing the curve. You get 2 marks for plotting 6 or 7 of the points accurately, and 1 mark for plotting 4 or 5, and the last mark is for drawing the smooth curve. Quite an easy 3 marks to start with on this question. You do get a tolerance of a half a square to start with, so you can be a little bit out on each of the squares, but please be as accurate as you can when you're plotting this graph. You notice we have got a squared graph here, which is a quadratic. So the word quadratic in the question here means squared, and this quadratic means that we have got a curved, or in this case a happy smiley face, because it is a quadratic graph. Now part B, we've got to write down the line of symmetry of the graph. The line of symmetry is where it's symmetrical about, so you can see clearly I've drawn the line down the middle, which is where it's symmetrical about. The tricky part here comes in writing its equation. So this is the x-axis, and this is where the x-axis is always equal to -1. So any point on this line here that's been drawn, x is equal to -1, and that's all you need for the mark. The mark scheme just says x equals -1 or equivalent, which means x plus 1 equals 0 would be an equivalent line, but most people would write x equals -1. So there's your mark for that. Part C, we've got to use this graph, x squared plus 2x minus 2 equal to 0. Now in part A, we had to draw the graph of x squared plus 2x minus 2, so that's the red curve we can still see. Now when that equals 0, what that is saying is where are you going to cross the x-axis, because this curve that we were given here was equal to y originally. So this was y equals x squared plus 2x minus 2. So this part here is when y is also equal to 0. Now the line y equals 0 is the x-axis, so it's this horizontal line coming across here. And we want to know the point where the curve and the horizontal line meet each other, and we've got to work out the solution. So the answer tells us it's going to be x values. So all I've got to do is work out the x value at this point here where they cross, and the point over here where they're going to cross. And you've just got to read off from your graph the two values. So when I read across, I get negative 2.8 for the first value that I highlighted, and 0.8 for the other value. Now this tells us on the mark scheme that my answer could be between minus 2.8 and minus 2.7, or 0.7 or 0.8, so there is a little bit of leeway, and there is 1 mark for each of those values that you gave correctly. Now question 9 is a question involving a circle. We've also got a right angle triangle within this circle, and when you see a question involving a circle, you should be thinking of circle theorems. When you see a right angle triangle, you should be thinking of Pythagoras or trigonometry. And later on in the question, it says work out the circumference of the circle. So we've got 3 things that are going on in this question. So there's quite a lot to take in. And this question is worth 5 marks in total. So in the bottom right hand corner, it tells us the number of marks. Now the key bits of information given that ABC is 90 degrees. That is given on the diagram just here for right angle. The length AC is 6.4, again given in the diagram. And BC is 3.7 meters, again given in the diagram. Now we've got a right angle triangle, and we've got to work out the circumference of the circle. Now you should be thinking in the back of your mind the circumference is equal to pi times the diameter. So we need to find the diameter of this circle. Now the diameter of this circle is the distance between B and between A. All the way across there is my diameter. And it's also the hypotenuse of the triangle because it is the side opposite the right angle. So we're going to be using Pythagoras to start with, and you should remember that Pythagoras' theorem says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now c is always the longest side on the triangle, and it is always the hypotenuse, and in this case it is the diameter of the circle. Now the reason this has got a right angle in the circle is because of one of the circle theorems where you've got a right angle in a semicircle, or a triangle in a semicircle. But the question doesn't require you to use any circle theorem knowledge, it kind of tells you that in the question. Now A and B, doesn't matter which way round we put A and B, so I've just put A as 3.7 and B as 6.4. Now if I put those values into the formula, I get 3.7 squared plus 6.4 squared plus c squared. That gives me 1 mark. If I rearrange that to find c, which is the diameter of the circle, so working out the value of 3.7 squared and 6.4 squared on your calculator, and square rooting that answer gives me my 2nd mark. My 3rd mark comes from the answer of the square root is 7.392563831. Is the diameter of the circle, which is my 3rd mark. Now, the next mark comes from working out the circumference. The circumference of the circle is pi times the diameter. We've just worked out the diameter of the circle, so it's going to be pi times 7.39. Make sure you use the whole digit on your calculator, so use the answer button on your calculator. And that will give you 23.22442422. Now we're going to round our answer to 3 significant figures. The 2 is the first significant figure, 3 is the second significant figure, and the decimal point and the second 2 is the 3rd significant figure. Then draw a line after here, and I'm going to look at what I'm going to do with this 2 here. 2 is lower than 5, so it's going to tell me to round down. So because I'm rounding down, my answer just stays as 23.2, which is the final mark, which gives me my 5 marks. The mark scheme says the answer is 23.2 to 23.25, so they've rounded to 3 or 4 significant figures here, for a total of 5 marks. There are 2 marks for doing Pythagoras, the square root of the 2 shorter sides added together squared. 1 mark for just doing 3.7 squared plus 6.4 squared. And then on top of that, the answer you get, so this there means the answer you got for your diameter times by pi. OE is all equivalent. And a method mark for doing 2 pi times your 7.39, so your diameter. in case you made a mistake. Then we can see that there's an SC2 down the bottom, because if you did no working or insufficient working, you do not get the marks. For maximum marks, you can get 2 marks if you didn't show your working. If you did write down the number 7.39, you automatically get 2 marks. There is some more information over on the right hand side, but we've been through the key bits where you're going to get your marks. Just this word there just means if you used a different answer for 7.39 in your working because you made a mistake, you will still get the method marks. Now question 10 is a critiquing question linking to the data, and there's quite a bit to read to start with, and you've got to make 3 different criticisms of the method that the student has used. Now down here in the bottom right hand corner you can see the question is out of 3 marks, so you get 1 mark for each statement that you write correctly. So you've got 3 statements you can put in here, number 1, number 2 and number 3. So you've got to give 3 different points, and make sure that they are 3 different points as it says in the question, and it does highlight the word 3 for you to do 3 different points. So we've got this question here. They're looking at adults and children, and we're collecting data in the student interview for the first 25 people found in the high street at 11 AM on one Monday morning. Now I'm going to show you the mark scheme straight away on this, because there are lots of different reasons you can give, and as long as your reasons are valid, then you will get marked correctly. So the 3 reasons that we've got from the mark scheme, or the ones they're using, are looking at any correct criticism. Now the first thing is that it is a small sample. Now what that means by a small sample is that 25 people were asked. Now 25 people is classed as a small sample. Anything under 30 is classed as a small sample. So to get better results we should be using a sample greater than 30. So that was your first method mark. The second mark, the sample may not be random, as in the population you're not sure who the people are. So there may be people at work who might be good people to ask, or for example the children could be at school because it is 11 o'clock on a Monday morning and the children should be at school. So that is another valid reason for number 2. Just make sure you don't overlap those 2 points there about the adults being at work and children being at school. They've got to be combined to be 1 point rather than 2 separate points. And the last point is that there's no control over the number of adults and children that you're asking. So when you're looking at the exercise adults and children do, you want to know how many adults there are and how many children are doing it, so you can compare the adults to the children, rather than you might be asking all adults, you might be asking all children. So you need to make sure it's fair. Now over on the right side it says over here, do not allow a repeated point. Okay, so you've written something that is very similar, then you're not allowed to have a repeated point. And B1 for each means that is a 1 method mark for each valid point that you give. Part B is looking at a data collection table. We've got to make 1 criticism of the student's table. Now this question was quite tricky. You've got to look at the data very carefully, and I'm just going to highlight this number here, the number 2 at the end of the first section and the number 2 on the end of this section here. Now the whole point of circling this is because if you look at the mark scheme, we have got an overlapping group. The reason it's overlapping is because 2 will be in this group here and 2 will be in this group here. And if you're marking off your tally, where do you tally number 2? Do you tally it in the top one up here for an adult, or do you tally it down below for the second one between 2 and 4? We don't know which one you tally it in, which is what the criticism is linking to this table. This was worth 1 mark. Okay, so you can see on the mark scheme the 1 mark, or in the bottom right hand corner it tells you how many marks the question is out of as well. Now question 11 is a question to do with the upper and lower bounds, and this question is worth 4 marks because in the bottom right hand corner it tells us the number 4 in the corner. And at the end of the question it says show how you decide, which means you must show your working in order to gain the full 4 marks for the question. Now this question is quite a wordy question, so make sure you read the question nice and carefully and you take out the key bits of information from the question. And to know that it is an upper and lower bound, within this question, the key word within here is this word minimum. So this word minimum is taking you to think, I need an upper bound or a lower bound. So you've got to take out the key bits of information from within this question to be able to work out what you've got to do. Now we're looking at panels, and the panels of the fence are 1.8 meters long, and this is correct to 1 decimal place. So these are 2 key points, and you can highlight this on your exam paper in the exam, either underline the words or highlight key parts to help you answer the question. So that means the distance from one panel to the next panel is 1.8 meters long. But that is not exactly 1.8 meters long, because there could be some error in that measurement. So someone could have measured that value of the fence panel slightly wrong, so there could be some leeway in that panel. So to help us work out what the leeway is going to be, we need to find the upper and lower bounds. Now if I write out 1.8 on the scale and I go either side of that to 1 decimal place, I'm looking at 1.7 and 1.9. And I'm looking at a number that will round to give me 1.8. I want to know the lowest number that will round to 1.8, and I want to know the maximum number that will round down to 1.8. So you see the orange arrow that's just appeared? That is telling me the range that I'm looking for my lower and my upper bound. Now to work that out accurately, we're going to look at this 1 decimal place. Now 1 decimal place is 0.1. And to find out the upper or lower bound, we're going to halve that 0.1, which gives me 0.05. And then I'm going to add and subtract it to the 1.8 to work out what the bounds are going to be. So the upper bound is going to be 1.8 plus 0.05, which gives me 1.85. Now when you're looking at this, you're probably thinking actually 1.85 would round to give me 1.9. Technically you're correct, but when we're looking at the upper bound, it's the value that will take you up to this 1.85. So we're allowing this 1.85, it doesn't equal 1.85. But for the upper bound, we always just use the easier value of 1.85. Now the lower bound is done by taking 1.85 and subtracting 0.05, which gives me 1.75 for 1 mark. Now I'm going to do a similar thing with the length of the garden. Now the garden, we're told, is 42 meters, and this is correct to the nearest meter. So this time I'm going to take the number 42, and I've got a meter below, which is 41, and a meter above, which is 43, and I'm going to look at the upper and lower bound, which is the distance between the orange arrow that's just appeared above that green diagram. So this time it's nearest meter, so that's 1 meter, and half of 1 meter is 0.5. So I'm going to do 42 plus 0.5 for my upper bound, which gives me 1 mark, and then 42 minus 0.5, which is 41.5. Now the next part of the question tells me I've got to look at the minimum number of panels Jamie should buy in order to be certain there are enough panels for the length of the garden. So to work out how many panels, I've got to do the length of the garden divided by the panel length. Okay, and most people can understand we've got to do that, but it wants to know the minimum number of panels and make sure we have got enough panels for the length of the garden. So this bit in the red box, the enough panels, is key. So we need to make sure he doesn't need to go back to the shop and buy any more panels because he was short on panels. Okay, so to find to make sure he's got enough panels, we need the maximum number of panels he's got to buy, so he doesn't need to ever go back and he's always got enough. So to find the maximum number of panels, we need the maximum length of the garden divided by the minimum length of the panel, because when you divide the maximum divided by the minimum length, that will give me the maximum number of panels in this case. So I'm going to replace the maximum length with the 42.5, and I'm going to replace the minimum length with 1.75, which gives me 1 mark. Now by doing that, that gives me 24.285,71429. Now I've got to decide what the maximum number of panels is. Now normally when we round, we would say that would round to 24. Okay, so the 0.2 would round down, leaving me with 24 panels. But I want to know the maximum number of panels. Now if I only bought 24 panels and I needed 24.2 of a panel, have we got enough panels? No, we don't. So what we actually have to do is we need to round this 24 up to give me 25 for 1 mark. So this will give me the 4 marks that we need for the question. Remembering to make sure you write your answer on the dotted line in the final space. Now the mark scheme for this question tells me that we get a method mark for trying to use the upper bound. Okay, so here, these two values here are classed as the upper bound, divided by my 1.75, which gives me 3 marks. Okay, there was 1 mark, so this B1 is for 1.75. There's another method mark here, B1, for either getting 42.5 or the 42.499, because technically 42.4999999, the maximum value you can have, okay, will round down to that 42. But for ease purposes, we use the 42.5, so I'd always recommend you use the 42.5. So 42.5 divided by 1.75, when we round that, that gives me the 25, which gives me my final answer mark, which gives me the 4 marks, which the question is out of in total. There are 3 marks, so B3 for using the answer of 24.29, and there is another method mark for there 24.29 seen correctly rounded up, okay, if you made a mistake or you got a different value. There is also a method mark if you've marked figures crossed out if you think that they have been rejected for use. So for example, we didn't use both maximum and minimum values. We only used 1 maximum and 1 minimum. So the other maximum and minimums we just rejected. We didn't need those in the question. So for rejecting those, you could get a method mark for doing that. So question 12 is a question to do with circle theorems. And in this question, you're given a diagram with some angles on, and you've got to work out a missing angle, and you've got to give your reason why. Now this question is worth 2 marks, as it shows you in the bottom right hand corner here with the number 2. So there's 1 mark for giving the angle, and then there's 1 mark for giving the correct reason. Now the angle you've got to work out is angle BCA. So if you start at corner B, go to C, and then go across to A, then the angle you're looking for is this angle in between here at C. Now to find this angle, we need to use a circle theorem. Now there are 8 circle theorems, and the one that we need for this one is probably the trickiest one to spot, is the circle theorem, which involves the alternate segment theory. Now what the alternate segment theory says is this angle here, okay, is in the alternate segment to the line that you've got down the bottom, and it's going to be exactly the same as this angle here, BAF. So I've got a tangent drawn to this circle, and these 2 angles here are going to be exactly the same because of the alternate segment theory. Okay, it is quite a tricky one to spot, this one. So you get 1 mark for just writing 53, and there's 1 mark for writing alternate segment. Now if you wrote theory as well, that's absolutely fine. That is optional, that word theory, and it does say condone, which means allow the word rule or allow the word theorem. Okay, so that was 2 marks in total for question 12A. For part B, we've got a more complicated diagram, and I'm going to show you 2 methods in order to be able to solve this. So the first method gets us to the answer slightly quicker, and they start off in exactly the same way. Now in this diagram here, you're told that the angle GOJ is 52, which is labelled on the diagram. You're told that angle GJH is X, which is the angle we want to find. And you're told that the lines JO and GH are both parallel. Now this question is worth 5 marks in total. It also says at the bottom of the question you must show your working. If you do not show your working and you get the correct answer, or you use the wrong working out to get the correct answer, you don't get any marks for it. So you must have the correct working in order to get the full 5 marks for this question. Now this question here is quite tricky to sort out which circle theorem you're going to use to start with, because it looks a bit like it's a bow tie, but the bow tie, which is the angle in the same segments are equal, has to be with both points, or all 4 points, on the circumference of the circle. And here I've only got 3 of the points on the circumference. That point of the origin is not on the circumference, so I can't use angles in the same arc are equal. So the circle theorem that is hidden here is the one that looks like the arrow that you can just see that's just appeared on the screen. And this says the angle of the circumference, okay, or the angle of the centre here, which is 2x, is double the angle at the circumference. So this is the circle theorem we're going to be using. And this angle here, right at the top, is the same as this angle here at h. So whatever angle is at the centre, if you halve that angle, that takes you to the angle at the edge. So in this case, we've got to do 52 divided by 2, which gives me 26. As angles at the centre is double the angle at the circumference. So this top angle up here is 26. You get 1 mark for working that out. The next mark comes from using the fact that we've got parallel lines. Now, using parallel lines, we can spot that we've got something called alternate angles. And that forms a Z within the parallel lines. And between that Z, we get the same angle. So this angle that's just been highlighted here, OJH, is also 26 because of the alternate angles mean that these two angles are both 26. That is my second mark. Now here I've got an isosceles triangle. Now I've got the triangle OJG, okay, is an isosceles triangle, which means the length OJ is a radius and the length OR is a radius, and these two are exactly the same. Now angles in a triangle add up to 180, so if I do 180 take away 52 gives me 128. Then if I halve that, I get 64, which is the angles at the bottom. Okay, so the one on the right hand side is 64, and also the angle OJG is 64. But I already know that OJH is 26, so angle X plus 26 is going to give me 64. And then if I take 26 from both sides, gives me 38, gives me my last mark. So you need to then write 38 on your lined answer once you've got your final answer. Now the second method, exactly the same as the first one up until the point where we get to the green line. So from this point here where I'm drawing a line across here, this above is going to be exactly the same. It's just an alternative method for the end of this question. So method 2, as I said, is the same up until this isosceles triangle. And then you can see I've got a triangle, which is triangle OJG. So if I just draw it on this triangle O to J to G in here, angles in a triangle add up to 180. So if I add up all those angles in triangle OJG, gives me X plus 64 plus 26 plus 52 equals 180. Subtract 64, 26 and 52 from 180 gives me 38, which again is the same answer, which gives me my final 5th mark. The mark scheme says you get 38 degrees with correct working. Okay, over here at the bottom it says SC2 for answer of 38 with no working or insufficient working. Underneath that it says if the answer is 38 and the working is incorrect, okay, only award the B marks. Okay, if you've got any of those angles up here and here, these are B marks here, only award those if you've got any of those correct, but you can't get any answers for marks for getting that 38. Now on the mark scheme they gave a mark for doing OGH using alternate angles of 52. I didn't use that in my working, but it was a method mark that they gave. We got the angle of JHG, which was 26. We got the angle of 64 from using the isosceles triangles for 2 marks, and then for working through to get the 138 is a method mark here on the end. Now question 13 is a question which the exam board calls enumeration. And this question is a question where you're given 3 bits of information normally, and you've got to work out the order or how many options you're going to get for a certain situation. In this case we're looking at food. So we've got a starter, we've got the main course, and we've got the dessert. And we've got this 3-course meal, and we've got to work out how many different ways can you have this 3-course meal. So could you have a prawn cocktail for a starter, the hunter's chicken and a trifle is one option. But you could have the prawn cocktail, hunter's chicken and the ice cream. You could also have prawn cocktail, hunter's chicken, then cheesecake. And you can keep going like this until we get all the different options. The question is asking how many different three-course meals can be chosen from the menu. So we've got to work out all the different ways which we can have as a different choice. So you could have mushroom, steak and trifle. Now it's going to take you a really long time to write down all the different combinations that you could have because there are so many different options. So the easiest and the quickest way to do it is to think about each one as we go along. So we have got 5 starters, okay? We have got 8 mains and we've got 7 desserts. So if you just count up how many are in each level, it gives you the numbers. And all we've got to do is multiply my number of starters by my number of main by my number of desserts. So I've got 5 starters, I've got 8 mains and I've got 7 desserts. So I multiply those together for 1 mark. And my second mark comes for just the final answer of typing that in your calculator, and that was worth 2 marks. That gives me all the possible combinations of starter, main and dessert in any order. Make sure you write your answer on the line given in the exam. The mark scheme gives you 2 marks. There's one here. It says the answer here is clearly 280. 2 here means this is the marks awarded for the question. N1 is a method mark. For getting 5 times the 8 times the 7 is the method mark. And you can get 1 mark if you did 6 times 8 times 7. There is also a method mark on the right side if you did a fraction rather than a whole, just the total number instead. But the answer we're looking for was 280. Now in part B it says find the fraction of 3-course meals which are completely vegetarian. So it tells us here B is for vegetarian and we're looking at the fraction. So we've got to look at each section separately. So for the starters, I have got 2 vegetarian options. So that will give me 2 out of my 5 options. So 2 out of 5 is my fraction. My main, I've got 3 vegetarian out of the 8 options for the main. My dessert, I have got 2 vegetarian out of the 7 options for the dessert. So you will get 1 mark for doing 2 over 5 times 3 over 8 times 2 over 7. Now the reason it's times is because it's the starter and the main and the dessert, and the word and in probability means multiply. So if we just type that in your calculator or multiply the top numbers, my numerators, and then multiply my denominators together, that will give me an answer of 12 divided by 280. And that is all you need to do to get the 2 marks for this question here. Now the mark scheme is here and it has cancelled down the answer. So it says over here equivalence to include. So if you cancelled your fraction down to 6 over 140 or 3 over 70, which is the lowest form, which is a better answer, then you will get 2 marks. OE over here means or equivalent. So your answer is 12 over 280 or equivalent. So if you've cancelled it down to better, then that's great. Here are the 2 marks to show for the method. For the actual exam question. N1 is a method mark, so you can see here the method we did here by multiplying these fractions together. If you just looked at the numerators or got 12, you've got a method mark for getting that. FT means follow through, so this is a follow through mark from the answer you got in part A. So the answer to part A was 280, so if you didn't got 280 in the first part and you used your answer of 280, so this word there means using your answer, but you can still get a mark. Now question 14 is a question to do with expanding, and not just expanding 2 brackets, we're expanding 3 brackets. And to be able to expand 3 brackets, we need to break it down into sections. Now this question is worth 2 marks. Now it looks like it's quite a lot to do in this question, but I'm going to break it down into small chunks, work through the long way, and then I'm going to show you the short way how to get the answers much quicker at the end. But we're going to go the long way first just to show where it's all coming from. So what we're going to do is we're going to just multiply the first 2 brackets. So I'm going to take the x and then I'm going to multiply by 3x, which gives me 3x squared. I'm then going to take the same x and I'm going to multiply it by the a, which gives me ax. Now I'm on the same two brackets, I'm going to take the other term, which is the 2, and multiply it by the 3x, which gives me 6x. Then I'm going to multiply that 2 by the a, which gives me 2a, and I have expanded the first two brackets. You can see the shape that the purple, blue, green and red lines have made makes a claw shape. If you put them in a different order, it makes a smiley face, or you could do it in whichever order you choose, but I prefer to do it in this order, so it makes the claw or a moon. Now once we've got these two first brackets expanded, I'm going to put brackets around this and then I'm going to multiply it by the last bracket, the third bracket. And we're going to do the same process again with the new two brackets. So I'm going to multiply my 3x squared by my bx, which is 3bx cubed. I'm going to multiply my 3x squared by my 3, which gives me 9x squared. I'm then going to multiply my ax by my bx, which gives me abx squared. Then I'm going to multiply the ax by the 3, which is 3ax. Then I'm going to move on to the next term, which is the 6x, and I'm going to multiply that by bx. Then that gives me 6bx squared. Then I'm going to multiply that same 6x by the 3, which gives me 18x. And then I'm going to multiply the 2ab by the bx, which gives me 2abx. And then I'm going to multiply the 2a by the 3, which gives me 6a. Every single term has been multiplied by every other term by doing it in this method. So if you break it down and work logically, it makes it nice and clear. Now the next step is to collect the like-to-like terms. Now there is only one term with x cubed in, so the first term is nice and easy. It is just 3bx cubed. We're then going to look for the x squared terms, okay, and I'm going to look for the coefficients, which are the numbers in front of the x squared term. So I've got a 9, I've got an ab, and I've got a plus 6b. So I could take a factor of x squared out. That leaves in the bracket 9 plus ab plus 6b for my x squared term. Now I'm going to do the same with the x term. So I'm going to look at the coefficient of x, or the number in front of the x. So I've got a 3a, I've got an 18, and I've got a 2ab. So I could take those three terms out, and that can come at the front of the x term. So I've got the 3a plus the 18 plus the 2ab, lots of x. And then on the end, I'm just left with the 6a. Now once we've got to this stage, we can now start to work out what the value of a and b are. So we're going to do something called compare the coefficients. And in order to be able to compare the coefficients, I'm going to look at the coefficient of x cubed. Okay, so in the question on the right hand side in front of the x cubed, I've got the number 6. Down at the bottom, I've got the number 3b, which means that the coefficients of x cubed must be the same, which means that 3b must equal 6. Once I've worked that out, then I can divide both sides by 3 to give me the value of b. So b is equal to 2, which is the answer there. Now you didn't actually need to expand all those brackets in order to be able to do what I've just done. If I took the first term from the first bracket, the x, the 3x that I'm just highlighting, and the bx, okay, and just multiply those first three terms together, x times 3x times bx gives me this 3bx cubed. Okay, so I could have just looked at those first three terms of each bracket and multiplied those together, then compared the powers like I've just shown you. That's the shortcut. We could do a similar thing with the last digits. Okay, so this time I'm going to take the number on the end, or the constant. Okay, so this is called the power of x to the 0, and this x to the 0 is the constant, the number on the end. So in the question, I've got a negative 30 in the question at the end, and what we've worked out down here, I have got 6a. So that means negative 30 is equal to 6a. So to find the value of a, I'm going to divide by 6, which means a is equal to negative 5. And then we can just pop that in the answer box as well. Again, the shortcut here is by taking this 2 on the right hand side of each bracket, the a, and the 3 that I've just highlighted here, so the second terms of each bracket. So 2 times a times 3 gives me the 6a, which is here, That is going to equal the minus 30 on the other side of the equation, and then just dividing. So there is a quick way to do it without having to do the full expansion, but it is handy to see how to do the full expansion, because in the exam they could expect you to expand 3 brackets. That was worth 2 marks. There was 1 mark for each correct answer. So there's a 1 mark for getting the a equals -5, and there's 1 mark for b equals 2. The mark scheme just shows there's 2 marks here. So here's where it shows there's 2 marks. There is 1 mark for getting the -5, and there is 1 mark for getting the 2. Over here it says B1, so for 1 correct. So if you've got one of the numbers correct, you get a method mark. There is a method mark for doing any pair of original brackets expanded correctly. So if you try to expand the brackets correctly, then you've got a method mark. Okay, or if you came down to expanding the 2 times a times 3 is equal to -30 or better, then you also get a method mark. Now question 15 is to do with algebraic proof. And this question is quite a tricky question because they expect you to use algebra on the question, and if you don't use any algebra then you can't get the answer correct or any method marks. So in the question it does say use algebra. Okay, so this means we're either using x's, n's, m's, different letters to prove that we have got an odd number multiplied by a different odd number always gives an answer that is an odd number. So there's lots of key terms in here and lots of odd numbers and even numbers. Now to make a number even, if I multiply any number by 2, that will always give me an even number. Okay, so any number I take, so say n is that any number I've got, if I multiply it by 2 I've always got an even number. Now to make this even number odd, if I subtract 1 from that number it will make it odd. I could have also added 1 to the number and it would have also been odd as well. It didn't matter whether I added 1 or subtracted 1 from that number, it would still be odd. I've chosen to subtract 1. Now I'm going to pick another odd number. So a different odd number, I'm going to choose a different letter, so 2m take away 1. It doesn't matter what letters you use, you could have used 2x minus 1 and 2y minus 1, all letters of your choosing. Now it says that the 2 odd numbers are multiplied, so I'm going to put these 2 numbers next to each other and that would have given you 1 mark. So these 2 odd numbers here next to each other that I'm going to multiply gives me 1 mark. Now to multiply these numbers I'm going to multiply each of the terms together. So I'm going to start with the first terms, and the 2n times the 2m is going to give me 4nm. Then I've got to multiply the 2n by the -1, which gives me -2n. Then I've got -1 times 2m, which is -2m. And then I've got -1 times -1, which is +1, which gives me 1 mark. I now need to look at this answer and I've got to try and work out why this answer is an odd number. Okay, because it says if you multiply an odd number multiplied by a different odd number, the answer is always odd. How do we know this expression is always odd? So we know the definition of an odd number is 2 times any number, and if I take away 1 or add 1 to that number, the answer will be odd. So the key bit is it's 2 lots of n first. Now in this expression here, the first 3 terms, so the 4nm, the -2n and the -2m are all even. So I could take a factor of 2 outside the front. So 2 times by the 2nm gives me the 4nm. The 2 times the -n gives me the -2n. And the 2 times the -m gives me -2m. So I have factorised this into one bracket. Now I have got 2 times by a number in terms of m and n. We don't know what this number is, but it doesn't really matter what that number is that I've just underlined, because 2 times any single number will always be an even number. So I have got an even number and then I'm adding 1 to it. Now we said earlier, to get an odd number you start with an even number and you subtract 1 from it, or you start with an odd number and you add 1 to it, sorry, an even number and you add 1 to it and it will make it odd. So therefore my even number plus 1 will be an odd number, therefore we've proved it, which is worth 1 mark. That is where the 4 marks are coming from. Now the mark scheme here shows that you've got m1 for getting the two brackets. It says any correct method. It said accept any letters, so it doesn't matter which letters you use. Okay. It does say allow poor use of brackets. So for example, if you wrote 2n plus 1 and 2m plus 1 and you didn't put any brackets in there, they will allow that for a mark if the terms are correct. Then you get 2 marks for doing the expanding and then factorising to make sure that we've got a full expression, and then factorising to show that we have got an even number, and which makes it an odd number. And then the final answer mark comes from explaining what is going on. So you need a statement showing that the expression is odd. E.g., the first 3 terms are even, you add 1 to it, it gives you an odd number. That will give you the 4 marks on this question. Over on the right hand side, it does give any extra information to give you some extra marks in case you didn't do it the method stated, and you can have a look through. It does say SC1 marks for 2n plus 1, etc. seen, or for the correct expansion of any of the 2 brackets, including x times x plus 1. So that could give you a 1 mark down here at the bottom. Now question 16 is to do with interpreting exponential growth formula. And in this question, there are quite a few words, but this type of question is pretty much a guaranteed question to come up on the paper 4 on the OCR exam board. Now in this question, there's a key bit of information here on line 3, where I'm just drawing the arrow to. And this formula here is really, really important that you understand what it means, because it does link in with the compound interest formula that you've met previously. Now, compound interest formula says that you've got the initial amount times your multiplier to the power of years. Okay, and this is exactly the same in this formula here. So exponential growth works very similarly to the compound interest because they're interlinked. Now, in this question here, we've got the prices of the house in 2016. So we're highlighting key bits of information from the question as we go along. Now we're assuming the value of the house can be used to predict the formula V equals 185,000 times 1.035 to the power of n, where n is the number of years after that start date of 2016. And we've got to explain in part A how you know that the value of the house is predicted to increase each year. Now, this bit of information comes from this multiplier. Okay, now I'm going to show you exactly how to do the multiplier in part B. So you might want to look back into part A after you've done part B, because it will make a little bit more sense. But basically, if you have got a number here greater than 1, you have got an increase. And if you've got a number less than 1, you have got a decrease. Now the number we have got here is 1.035, which is greater than 1, which means it's an increase. And the mark scheme will literally give you 1 mark. Okay, so this number here in the square bracket tells you how many marks it is. Literally 1 mark for writing 1.035 is greater than 1. OE means or equivalent. So you need to just state that that number there, the multiplier, is greater than 1. Now, as I said, in part B, we're going to look at finding this multiplier, because we've got to write down the percentage increase. So they want to be more specific now. What is this percentage increase per year that is used in the formula? Okay, and again, this is coming from the multiplier. And this is a key formula, so make sure you've written it down and highlight it. So the multiplier is 100 plus your percentage divided by 100, and that's what it is if it's a percentage increase. If it's a decrease, you would do 100 take away the percentage divided by 100. Now we're just going to put in the values we know. We know the multiplier is 1.035. So if we replace the multiplier with 1.035, the rest of the numbers stay exactly the same, and we're going to rearrange this formula to find out this percentage, because that's what the question is asking us to do. Now if I multiply 1.035 by 100, it will get rid of this 100 down here in the denominator. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 100, leaving me with 103.5 is equal to 100 plus the percentage. Now to get the percentage on its own, we need to get rid of this plus 100 here. So the opposite to plus 100 is subtract 100. So the percentage is going to be 103.5 take away 100, which is 3.5%. You need to write that in your answer box. And again, this was worth 1 mark. So you can see at the end of the question here in the square bracket, that tells us how many marks the question is. and the mark scheme is just 1 mark for writing a 3.5. Part C is still linking to this same formula, and we've now got to write down the value of the house at the start of 2016. And we're told that this formula works from 2016. So in the question it says where n is the number of years after the start of 2016. So this is our starting point, or our initial value. So initially, when we're in 2016, no time has passed, so we say n is equal to 0. So then you're just going to plug n is 0 into the formula that is given here on the third row down again. So that v equals 185,000 times 1.035 to the power of n. This time n is going to be 0 though. Now you should know anything to the power of 0 is 1. But if you're unsure, you're allowed a calculator on this question. So type it in on your calculator. Make sure you know how to use your calculator to get the answer. Which is 185,000 times by 1, which is just 185,000. Make sure you write it on the answer mark, answer box or line even, and then that will tell you how many marks you've got for that question. So this question was worth 1 mark. Now part D is worth 2 marks. Okay, so we've got to do a little bit of working out on this one. So we've got to calculate the predicted value of the house at the start of 2020, giving your answer to 4 significant figures, and they've highlighted that number 4 just in case you haven't read the question carefully, and you'll see why that's important in a minute. Now we've got n equals 2022 take away 2016, which is equal to 4. So that is the number of years. Now the number of years is going to be my initial amount, which is 185,000 times by 1.035 to the power of 4, and that is worth 1 mark. Now I need to type that into my calculator. So if you type that in, you should get the answer 212,291. But the question says write your answer to 4 significant figures. So if you wrote that, you will only have got 1 mark. Here I have got 1, 2, 3, 4, and there are actually 5, 6 significant figures in the answer that I've just written down. But we've got to write the answer to 4 significant figures. So to help us do that, after the 4 significant figures, okay, we draw a line down and we're going to look at the digit afterwards, which is this 9 here. Now the 9 is bigger than 5, so that tells us we're going to round up. So rounding this number to 4 significant figures is 212,300, and that's your second mark. Now you can see on the mark scheme for this one that you get 1 mark for doing the 185,000 times by 1.035 to the power of 4, or writing out that whole digit without rounding to 4 significant figures. The second mark comes from making sure it is rounding to 4 significant figures. Now part E of this question, we've got to compare its value at the start of 2016 and show what happens, show that the formula predicts the house will have doubled in value at some point during 2036. So that is between the year 2036 and the year 2037. So we've got to see what is going on. So initially, if I just look at the house price in 2016 and double it, I get 185,000 times by 2, which gives me 370,000. Now, if I take 2036 and work out the number of years, 2036 take away the 2016, which is the initial part, gives me 20. If I put that in the formula, again, the same formula on the third line down here, I've got V equals 185,000 times 1.035 to the power of 20, and that is 1 mark. If you work that answer out, you get 368,111. So that's your second mark. This question is worth 3 marks in total. Okay, so you can see there's 3 marks in total for this question. Now, once I've done that for 2036, it says show that it has doubled in value at some point during this 2036. Now, in 2036, the double the amount is 370,000. Now we haven't quite made 370,000 in the year 2036. So we're going to look at what happens in 2037. So n is now going to be 1 year later, or one more year, which is 21. And if I type 21 in, I get 185,000 times 1.035 to the power of 21, which gives me 380,995 for 1 mark. So that is my third mark. But you do need to make sure that you understand what you've just shown here, because this 370,000 is now between the 368,111 and the 380,995. So we have shown that the house price has doubled in that time. Now you can see on the mark scheme there are 2 marks for getting this 368,111. That's the 2 marks here. And then there's another mark for where we put the n is 21 in. Here gives me the 3rd mark. Now they have got an alternative method over on the right hand side. The top one here is just looking at using the multiplier to the power of 20 and the multiplier to the power of 21. And that just shows us that we have got a value of 1.98 and 2.05. Now 2.05 is over 2, which when you get to 2, that's when you're doubling. So that's being able to interpret that result. As an alternative method, I think the first method that I've shown you above is slightly easier to understand in terms of values, so you can actually see that it has physically doubled. Now in part II, we've got to give one reason why this may not happen. Now this is worth 1 mark, you can see in the square box, and there are numerous answers you can give. I'm just going to show you the mark scheme so you can see what answers they were actually looking for. So any correct explanation, the rate of increase may not continue, and then it says see appendix. Now I'm just going to put up the appendix here. So this is some example of responses for question 16E part 2. Any of these answers at the top, okay, are worth 1 mark. Okay, so the rate of increase may not continue, the house price could fluctuate, they could drop, something may cause the price to drop, they may increase at different rates, the house may be demolished, except any home improvements, e.g. extension, might increase faster than predicted. Any of those will give you 1 mark. The answers down the bottom will give you 0 marks. So if you said it's only an estimate, or it's only a prediction, or the house market may have changed, they won't give you a mark. And question 17 is a question to do with conditional probability in tree diagrams, and this question is worth 4 marks. Make sure you read the question carefully so you understand exactly what you have got to work out as you go along. Now in this question we've got 15 sweets in the bag, and 10 of the sweets are toffee and 5 are mint. Now Reese takes 2 of the sweets at random, and we've got to work out the probability that he takes 1 of each type. Okay, so this is the key bit, we've got to find 1 of each type of sweet. Okay, now the easiest way to do this is visually by using a tree diagram to show you exactly what is going on. And when we use a tree diagram, we literally start out by having different strands. And within a key diagram, we have got some key words. The word and means multiply, and the word or means add. Now if I look at my first strand, this is basically, I've got my bag of sweets and I'm going to pick out a sweet. So I can either pick out a toffee, so T represents toffee, or I could pick out a mint, where M represents mint. Now for toffees, I have got 10 of those toffees in the bag, which means 10 out of 15 are going to be toffees. Now that fraction does cancel down, but we're not going to bother cancelling it down because it just makes it easier when it comes to the end when we have to add, because our denominators will be the same. Which means mint, there are 5 of them, and then we have got 15 in total. So those probabilities are fairly straightforward. Now the next probabilities become slightly more difficult. So I've had my bag of sweets, I'm going to take out a toffee. So I'm looking on the top strand, I've taken out a toffee. Now Reese is going to pick out a different sweet. Okay? Now when he picks out a different sweet, there are only 14 sweets left in the bag. And if he's already picked out a toffee, then there were 10 toffees before, so now there are only 9 toffees left. So we've now got 9 out of 14 for my second pull out, which gives you a mark for spotting that you're going out of 14. So these have not been replaced. If it says in the question that it's replaced, the denominator will be the same on both strands, but here there is no mention of the word replacement, so we are taking one out and one's been eaten. Now there were 10 toffees, now there are only 9 toffees, but there are still 5 mints, so that means there are 5 out of 14 mint. We're now going to go back and restart the whole process again, and we're going to think about what happens with the mint. Okay, so I've got 15 sweets in the bag. I've now pulled out a mint sweet, and the probability of doing that was 5 out of 15. Now I can pull another sweet out, which will either be a toffee or a mint again. But this time when I pick out a toffee, okay, I've only picked out a mint so far. So there are still 10 toffees in the bag. So there are going to be 10 out of the 14 toffees that are left in the bag for toffee. And then for mint, I've taken a mint out on the first try. And then there are 1 less mint. So there's only going to be 4 mints out of the 14. And this gives me my probability for the mint. Now we've got to work out the probability that he takes one of each type. So I need to look along the strands to work out what the different options are. So I could have a toffee and a toffee. Now the P with the brackets means the probability. So I could work out the probability of getting a toffee and a toffee. I could work out the probability of getting a toffee and a mint. I could work out the probability of getting a mint then a toffee. Or I could work out the probability of getting a mint and a mint. Now I want to work out the probability of one of each type. So I want different ones. So I want a toffee and a mint, or I want a mint and a toffee. So to get a toffee and a mint, I start at the beginning and I come along my toffee strand, and then I come along my mint strand down here, which gives me the probability of a toffee and a mint. So I've got to multiply those two probabilities, for 10 over 15 and the 5 over 14. If I multiply those together, that will give me 50 over 210. Remember, you just multiply the numerators, so 10 times 5 is the 50, and the 15 times the 14 is 210, and that gives you a mark. We're going to do a similar thing now the opposite way round for a mint followed by a toffee. So for a mint followed by a toffee, we're going to have 5 over 15 times by 10 over 14. Multiply your numerators and multiply your denominators again. So 5 times 10 in the numerator is 50, and 15 times 14 is 210 in the denominator. Now we want to know the probability that he takes one of each sweet. So you could have a toffee and a mint, or a mint and a toffee. So remember the key words, the word and, which is why we've multiplied earlier. So we've already done the multiply. Now we've got these two options, and it is one or the other. So we're now going to add those two answers together, because this is the word or. So 50 over 210 plus 50 over 210 for 1 mark. Then add the numerators. Remember, the denominator stays the same, which gives me 100 over 210, which cancels down to 10 over 21, just taking a 0 off the end of each, or dividing by 10. So we have got the 4 marks there, so you can see where the 4 marks have come from. The mark scheme says the answer is 100 over 210. OE means or equivalent. This was worth a total of 4 marks. So you can see you got B1, which is a method mark for getting either 9 over 14 or 5 over 14, or any of those fractions over 14 of the second strands. A method mark for getting 10 over 15 times by 5 over 14, or the opposite way round, depending on which strand you went along. Then you've got a method mark for doing 2 times by your 50 over 210, or we added them rather than doing it as a product. And that's where your 4 marks came from on the mark scheme. You can see over on the right hand side they are allowing common equivalents for 4 marks, so you can use decimals. They have even allowed percentages on this question. I would not recommend using percentages, because normally on a probability question they don't like percentages, and it does condone the answer 0.48 for evidence with showing some correct working. Okay, so you do need to show your working out. If you got the answer 100 over 225, you can get 2 marks. If you got 50 over 225, you can get 1 mark. Now this question involves the equation of a circle, and at GCSE there is a key equation you need to know, and the key formula is that x squared plus y squared equals r squared. Now please write this down and highlight it and make sure you remember that key formula. And once you know the key formula, the question then becomes much easier to answer. So we've got to work out the equation of this circle. And in this circle, we can see that the centre of this circle is the origin, the point 0, 0. And the radius of this circle is 3. So r in this question here, or in this formula, is the radius of the circle. So the distance from the centre to the edge of the circle is my radius. So r is going to be 3. So x squared plus y squared is equal to 3 squared. Then we just need to work out the value of 3 squared, and you are allowed a calculator for this. And x squared plus y squared is going to equal 9, and that will give you 2 marks. There is 1, okay, just for writing x squared plus y squared equals k, which is not 9. So here, B1. So your x squared plus y squared is equal to a number. And then the final answer, or 2 marks, is for x squared plus y squared is equal to 3 squared. OE means equivalent. So even if you'd have written it as the top answer that I first gave, you would have still got 2 marks. You didn't even need to work out that 3 squared was 9. First, we're going to identify the key words in the question. So here, single fraction and simplest form are my key words. Now the single fraction is one single fraction, as the name suggests, which means the 2 fractions you can see in front of you are combined together to make one fraction. Once you've got that one fraction, you then need to cancel and put it in its simplest form. This question is worth 4 marks, and you must show your method in order to get the full 4 marks for this question. Now press pause, have a go answering the question, and then press play when you're ready to hear the answer. So to start with, you should have found your common denominator, and this will give you your first method mark. Now to find your common denominator, you need to multiply the 2 numbers at the bottom together, i.e. in this case 2n plus 3 times by n squared plus 1. Then to work out the numerators, we're going to multiply the top left by the bottom right, so 4 times by n squared plus 1, because if you cancel those n squared plus 1's on the left hand side, it gives you back to the same question, the 4 over 2n plus 3. So they cancel down to the same fraction. On the right hand side, the denominator is 2n plus 3 and n squared plus 1, because it's exactly the same as the first one. I'm then going to take the bottom left, which is 2n plus 3, and I'm going to multiply that by the top right, which is 2n. By doing that, here I can see that the 2n's plus 3's will cancel, leaving me with the original fraction 2n over n squared plus 1. So you get 1 method mark for your common denominator and 1 method mark for your common numerator, which are the numbers at the top. From here, I could combine this into one fraction. So the denominator stays exactly the same, and then I could just put the 2 lines together. So I get 4 bracket n squared plus 1 minus 2n bracket 2n plus 3. I'm then going to expand the brackets. So I'm going to do 4 times n squared, which gives me 4n squared, and 4 times 1, which gives me 4. Be careful when you expand the second bracket, because you have got minus 2n times by 2n, which gives you the minus 4n squared, and the minus 2n times by 3, which gives you negative 6n. That is for your third mark. To get the final mark, we need to simplify this answer, as the question said. So I look at the question, I've got 4n squared plus a 4n, take away a 4n squared, take away 6n. You can see that those 4n squareds cancel, leaving me with the 4 take away the 6n. This is my fourth and final mark. Make sure you write that answer on the dotted line. So here I've got my answer as a single fraction, as the question said, and it is in its simplest form. There is nothing that will cancel. The mark scheme for this question shows us the final answer is in the first red box you've just seen. There were 4 marks in total, and our method marks are here, showing you where the methods were coming from. And on the end, we've got guidance to give you a little bit extra information if you need any more information on that question. In this question, the key word is simplify, and this question is worth 5 marks, so there's definitely a lot of marks for working. The key word that you need to be able to use is the word factorise, which means put into brackets. So that's what you've actually got to do on this question in order to be able to simplify. Press pause and have a go at the question and press play when you're ready to hear the answer. So putting the question into brackets means that there are two brackets and the two numbers at the front of each bracket are going to be the same in the numerator. So you've got an x and an x because x times x gives you x squared in the numerator. In the denominator you've got 2x and an x because 2x times x gives you 2x squared. That's the easy starting point. And the next bit is the tricky bit where you're working out the numbers after the x's in the brackets. So to do that we're going to look at the number on the end. So in the numerator I've got a negative 12 on the end and I'm looking for two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 12. Then I'm trying to think of these two numbers that I've just worked out. I've then got to add them together and I've got to get the answer of negative 1 because negative 1 is the coefficient of this minus x. So I've got minus 1 lot of x. So the two numbers I'm looking for are negative 4 and positive 3 because negative 4 times positive 3 gives me negative 12 and negative 4 plus 3 gives me negative 1. So there are 4 marks for this question. Each correct pair of brackets is worth 2 marks. So what we've done so far would have given you 2 marks. The denominator is harder to factorise because you've got a 2x squared minus a 3x minus a 20 and that 2x squared makes it more complicated. But the same principle applies. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me negative 20 and they're going to add to give me negative 3. Now when we're simplifying, one of the numbers in the brackets of the numerator has got to be the same as in the denominator. Now I've got to have two numbers that multiply to that green number is negative 20. Now two numbers that multiply to give negative 20, if I use the numbers that are in the numerator, if I've got a 3, 3 doesn't fit into 20, so one of the numbers must be negative 4. Okay, so negative 4 times something is going to give me that negative 20. Now negative 4 times 5 is equal to negative 20. Now if I look at this to check that this gives me the negative 3, 5 times x gives me 5x, 2x times negative 4 gives me negative 8x, and negative 8x plus the 5x gives me the negative 3x. So it does work. Now I've got to look at the brackets I've got and I've got to see what will cancel to be able to simplify my answer. So that was the key word in the question, simplify. So if you see here I've got two x minus 4s. These will cancel, leaving me with x plus 3 over 2x plus 5 for 1 mark, which is the total of the 5 marks. Remember to write your answer on the dotted line on the right hand side of your page. The mark scheme shows you the final answer, the number of marks for the question, method marks, and it says condone brackets crossed out, which means allow any brackets crossed out. This is a question on quadratic inequalities. Now the key words of this question are solve, using set notation, and you must show you're working out. Otherwise you won't be awarded the 5 marks that are available for this question. Please press pause, have a go at the question and then press play when you're ready to see the answer. Now in this question we've got to solve this inequality, which basically means find x. What x values satisfy the equation x squared plus 4x minus 12 is less than or equal to 0. So we're going to factorise into 2 brackets to start with. And I'm looking for two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 12. And when I add them, they make 4. So the two numbers I'm looking at are 6 and negative 2, because 6 times negative 2 is negative 12, and 6 take away 2 is plus 4. When we solve a quadratic or factorise a quadratic, it must go into 2 brackets, and x is always at the front of each bracket because x times x gives me the x squared that is at the front of the equation. Now the inequality sign must stay the same, so the inequality sign of the question must stay the same later on, and this was worth 2 marks if you managed to factorise into 2 brackets. From here we need to look at each bracket separately, and this will give me the critical values. So if I say x plus 6 equals 0 or x take away 2 equals 0, that means x is equal to 6 or x is equal to 2, which will give you a mark. Once you've got the critical values, you can use these to do a little sketch to help us solve a graph. So with a little sketch, I'm going to put negative 6 and 2 across the x-axis to show where this graph crosses the x-axis. It is a smiley face graph, so a happy face, because we've got a positive x squared. and we're looking at the equation, and we've got to say when this quadratic equation is less than or equal to 0. So this equation is less than or equal to 0 when it is below this green line that has just appeared, because this green line is the line 0. So y equals 0 is this green line, and I want to know when we're less than or equal to 0. So the graph is less than or equal to 0 below the line, which is between the points -6 and 2, which will give me the inequality between -6 and 2, and that will give you 1 mark. So I've got 4 marks so far, but the final mark comes from putting our answer in set notation. So to do that, all we have to do is put curly brackets on the outside, an x, then a colon, and then we write the equation we just got, the expression, and that will give us our answer in set notation. Make sure you put your answer on the dotted line to give you the full 5 marks. The mark scheme shows us, here's the answer. You get 5 marks for the question. We're given the method marks in this section, and we're given the guidance on the end. Key bit down the bottom that's just been highlighted in purple. You get 0 or 1 scored if you haven't done it correctly. So we get SC2, which means you can only get a maximum of 2 marks if you didn't write it in set notation without showing any working out, because the answer must show you're working out. You will only get 1 mark, so the SC1 means 1 mark if you wrote between -6 and 2. So please make sure you show you're working out to get the full marks. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Comment below to let me know what you would like to see in my next video. See you next time!